Jake slammed his hand on the desk, snarling, "You think you can boss me around?" Before anyone could react, his hand gripped Ms. Carter's throat. The class gasped. Calmly, she whispered, "You picked the wrong teacher, Jake. No one knew her military past was about to change everything." The moments after Jake's violent outburst rippled through the school like shockwaves. For the students in that laboratory, time had seemed to stop, frozen on the image of a teenage bully with his hand pressed against his teacher's throat. But before the tension could spiral into irreversible disaster, something remarkable unfolded. To understand how this confrontation reached such a boiling point, we need to step back and examine the environment in which it took place. Jake Miller was not an unfamiliar name within the school halls. His reputation preceded him. He was known for arrogance, aggression, and a relentless desire to assert dominance over those around him. Teachers whispered about him in the staff room, often frustrated that their disciplinary measures never seemed to make an impact. Detention, suspensions, warnings, none of it worked. Jake always returned more emboldened, more convinced that he was untouchable. For his peers, Jake was both feared and despised. He thrived on intimidation, turning classrooms into stages for his reckless performances. Smaller students were his favorite targets. He would shove them into lockers, mock their appearances, and laugh at their misfortunes. Yet when it came to authority, Jake carried himself with the same defiance. He wasn't afraid to talk back, disrupt classes, or challenge teachers directly, and that's precisely what brought him into direct conflict with Ms. Carter. From the first day she stepped into the science lab, Ms. Carter was different. She spoke less, observed more. Where other teachers raised their voices in frustration, she stayed calm. When Jake attempted his usual interruptions, she simply fixed him with a quiet, steady look that unnerved him far more than any lecture could. For the first time in years, Jake wasn't sure his intimidation tactics were working. Students began to notice. "Ms. Carter doesn't flinch," one of them whispered, after Jake threw a pen across the room, trying to get her attention. She had simply picked it up, placed it back on his desk, and continued her lesson without a word. The incident spread through the school, fueling speculation about why she didn't react the way most teachers did. Jake, however, saw it as a challenge. In his mind, Ms. Carter was mocking him, denying him the satisfaction of control. And for someone like Jake, control was everything. Over the following weeks, his attempts to provoke her escalated. He deliberately arrived late to class, dragging his chair noisily across the floor. He talked over her lectures, laughed during serious discussions, and encouraged his friends to join in the disruption. Yet Ms. Carter never raised her voice. She never lost composure. That silence, that calmness, became Jake's greatest frustration. Then came the day of the laboratory session, the day everything boiled over. It began like any other class. Students were assigned group experiments, mixing chemicals and recording their results. Ms. Carter moved between tables, offering quiet guidance and correcting mistakes. Jake, sitting in the back with two classmates, wasn't interested in science. He was interested in provoking her. "Hey, teach," he called out mockingly. "You think you're smarter than me, huh? Bet you can't even explain why water's wet." His friends laughed, but Ms. Carter didn't respond. "Ignored again," Jake muttered, his eyes narrowing. He kicked over a stool, letting it crash to the ground with a loud bang. The room went silent. Ms. Carter looked at him calmly. "Pick it up, Jake." Her voice wasn't raised, but her tone carried an authority that unsettled him. And in that moment, Jake snapped. "You don't tell me what to do," he barked, marching toward her. "You're nothing but a lousy teacher hiding behind these walls. Out there, you'd be nothing." He grabbed her by the throat. Students screamed. One rushed toward the door to call for help, while others froze, unsure if they should intervene. But Ms. Carter did not panic. She didn't flinch, didn't struggle, didn't even widen her eyes in fear. Instead, she looked directly at Jake, her expression unreadable. "Let go of me," she said quietly. There was something in her voice, a calm command, that made even Jake hesitate for a fraction of a second. And that hesitation was telling, because Ms. Carter wasn't just any teacher. Before this classroom, before the quiet life of textbooks and lesson plans, she had worn a very different uniform. Years earlier, Ms. Carter had served in the military. She was trained in endurance, discipline, and self-control. She had seen real conflict, faced real danger, and survived situations far more terrifying than a teenage bully's outburst. But she had left that life behind, seeking peace in the world of education, determined to shape the future instead of fighting battles. The students didn't know it yet, but Jake Miller had just made the gravest mistake of his young life. Because unlike other teachers, Ms. Carter knew exactly how to deal with aggression. She had been trained to stay calm under pressure, to assess threats, and to act only when necessary. And in this classroom, in front of dozens of witnesses, Jake was about to learn a lesson that would stay with him forever. As whispers spread across the room and panic threatened to spiral, Ms. Carter's composure only deepened. She wasn't a victim here. She was in control. And the moment she decided to move, her military past would reveal itself in ways none of her students could have imagined. Jake believed he had power over her. He believed intimidation was enough. But he was about to discover that true strength doesn't come from fear. It comes from discipline, training, and the ability to act with precision when it matters most. The development of this confrontation had been building for weeks, perhaps even months. Jake's arrogance had pushed him closer and closer to this breaking point, while Ms. Carter's patience had silently prepared the stage for the truth to come out. Now, with his hand on her throat and his ego on the line, the balance of power was about to shift dramatically. And when it did, Jake's entire future would collapse before his eyes. The lab was silent, except for the uneven sound of Jake's breathing as his hand pressed against Ms. Carter's throat. His classmates stared, frozen in disbelief. Some looked horrified, others shocked, and a few even leaned back in fear as though danger might spill over onto them. The teacher they thought they knew, the calm, quiet woman in neat blouses and cardigans, stood unmoved, her gaze fixed on Jake as though she could see right through him. Her voice came out low and steady, so calm it was chilling. "Let go, Jake." But Jake only laughed, tightening his grip slightly. "What are you gonna do? Call the principal? Cry for help? You don't scare me." His words dripped with arrogance. Every syllable meant to prove that he was in control. What Jake didn't realize was that his display of power was nothing compared to what Ms. Carter was capable of. Her mind was already working like a soldier's, calculating angles, evaluating threats, measuring how far she could let this go before she acted. And then, in a single fluid motion, everything changed. Her right hand shot upward, striking the inside of Jake's wrist with a sharp snap. His grip on her throat loosened instantly, a startled grunt escaping his lips. Before he could react, she shifted her weight, grabbed his arm, and twisted it behind his back. In one seamless maneuver, the bully who had terrorized the school was pinned face first against the lab table. The entire room erupted in gasps. Some students covered their mouths, others backed away, and a few instinctively pulled out their phones, desperate to capture the unbelievable scene unfolding before them. "Get off me!" Jake screamed, thrashing against her hold. But Ms. Carter didn't even flinch. Her grip was firm, controlled, and unyielding. "You think strength is about control through fear?" she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You have no idea what real strength is." For the first time, Jake's bravado cracked. His eyes darted around the room, searching for allies, for someone to laugh or cheer him on. But the room had turned against him. No one supported him now. The classmates who once trembled at his taunts now stared at him with wide eyes, watching him collapse under the quiet power of a teacher they had underestimated. "Let me go!" Jake shouted again, his voice breaking with desperation. Ms. Carter leaned closer, her voice so quiet that only he could hear. "I've dealt with men twice your size in combat zones. You are nothing compared to them." and I will not let you hurt anyone else. The words hit him harder than the physical hold she had on him. Combat zones. For the first time, Jake began to understand. This wasn't a normal teacher. This wasn't someone he could intimidate with empty threats. This was someone who had lived through real battles, who had stared down real danger and survived. Whispers rippled through the classroom as the truth spread like wildfire. "Combat zones?" a student murmured. "Wait, is she military?" another whispered. Finally, Ms. Carter released Jake, letting him stumble backward. But before he could regain his arrogance, she stepped forward, her posture firm, her eyes locked on him with unshakable authority. "You think bullying makes you powerful? That grabbing someone's throat makes you feared? Let me tell you something, Jake. Fear doesn't last. Respect does, and you have none." The silence in the room was deafening. Every word she spoke landed with the weight of truth. Jake tried to recover, puffing up his chest, spitting out weak insults. You can't talk to me like that. My dad will—" But his voice faltered. The students could see it now. His bravado was cracking, his confidence melting away. He wasn't the predator in the room anymore. He was the prey. Ms. Carter finally revealed what no one had known. She turned to the class, her voice calm but commanding. "Yes, I served. I wore the uniform of this country for 12 years. I've been in places you cannot imagine, faced enemies you've only seen in movies, and I came back here to teach because I wanted to give you something I didn't have at your age, the chance to build your future without fear." The students were stunned. Eyes widened, jaws dropped, phones lowered as respect replaced curiosity. The quiet teacher they once overlooked was suddenly transformed into something larger than life. A hero, a protector, a figure of true strength. Jake stood frozen, his face pale, his confidence shattered. The room he once controlled now belonged to her. "Strength," Ms. Carter continued, her gaze fixed on Jake, "isn't about putting others down. It's about standing up for them. It's about discipline, courage, and knowing when to fight and when to walk away." Jake looked down, his fists trembling, not with anger this time, but with shame. For the first time, he felt the weight of consequences he couldn't escape. The principal burst into the room moments later, alerted by panicked students in the hallway. "What on earth is going on here?" he demanded. The scene he walked into left him stunned. A teacher standing tall, a notorious bully trembling, and a classroom of witnesses who had just seen authority redefined. Students rushed to explain, words tumbling over one another. Jake grabbed her throat. "She took him down in one move. She's military." Principal Harris turned to Ms. Carter, searching her face for confirmation. She simply nodded. "It's true, and I won't apologize for defending myself or this classroom." The room fell silent again, waiting for the principal's response. But he didn't reprimand her. He didn't scold her for using force. Instead, he turned to Jake, his expression dark with disappointment. "You've crossed the line for the last time." Jake tried to argue, sputtering excuses, blaming Ms. Carter, claiming she attacked him. But the truth was undeniable. Dozens of students had seen what really happened, and their loyalty wasn't with him anymore. They spoke over him, correcting his lies, insisting on the truth. For once, Jake's voice was drowned out, not by fear, but by justice. And in that moment, Jake's future began to unravel. The silence that lingered after the principal's stern words was heavy, suffocating even. For years, Jake had strutted through the school like an untouchable king. He controlled classrooms, mocked teachers, and silenced peers with fear. But in that single afternoon, the crown had slipped from his head and shattered on the floor of the science lab. The principal ordered Jake to follow him to the office. His usual swagger was gone. He walked stiffly, glancing back at his classmates as though hoping to find even one supportive face. But all he saw was disbelief and quiet satisfaction. The same students who once cowered under his bullying now looked at him as if he was already defeated. Ms. Carter, still composed, remained in the lab with her students. "Return to your work," she said gently, though her voice carried a weight that silenced any thought of chatter. The students obeyed instantly, but the atmosphere had shifted. They weren't just students anymore. They were witnesses to a lesson far more important than the experiment before them. In the principal's office, the conversation was less forgiving. "Jake," Principal Harris said, leaning across his desk, "I've defended you more times than I can count. I've excused your behavior, given you chances other students would never get. But today, you assaulted a teacher. That cannot be overlooked." Jake tried his usual tricks: excuses, half-truths, blame-shifting. "She provoked me. She humiliated me in front of everyone. I didn't mean it. She overreacted." But Harris wasn't listening this time. He had seen the fear in Jake's eyes when Ms. Carter restrained him. He had heard the conviction in her voice as she revealed her military past. And deep down, Harris knew that Jake's arrogance had finally met its match. "You're suspended," Harris declared firmly. "Effective immediately. And after this, the school board will review whether you should be expelled. Frankly, I'll be recommending it." Jake's mouth fell open. "You can't do that. My dad's on the school committee." "Your father won't save you this time," Harris cut in sharply. "Actions have consequences, and you crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed." When Jake stormed out of the office, his face was pale. The whispers in the hallways followed him like shadows. Word of the incident had already spread. Students were retelling the moment Ms. Carter flipped the tables, literally and figuratively, on the school's biggest bully. By the end of the day, Jake was no longer feared. He was pitied, even mocked. Videos of the altercation circulated online within hours. Clips of him pinned to the table, Ms. Carter's calm command echoing through the lab, went viral among the students. The comments weren't kind. "Guess the tough guy isn't so tough. Military beats bully any day. Ms. Carter's a legend." The power Jake once wielded crumbled with every share, every laugh, every whispered retelling of how he had been dismantled not by brute force, but by discipline and precision. Meanwhile, Ms. Carter carried on with quiet dignity. She didn't gloat, didn't celebrate, and didn't humiliate Jake further. Her demeanor was the same as always, calm, steady, focused on her students' success. But her presence commanded a new kind of respect. Students who once ignored her guidance now leaned in when she spoke. Those who had been afraid of Jake found courage in her strength. The ripple effect extended beyond the classroom. Parents began calling the school, some expressing outrage at Jake's behavior, others voicing admiration for Ms. Carter. Local news outlets caught wind of the story, painting her as a symbol of discipline and resilience in an age where teachers were often undermined. But for Ms. Carter, the attention was irrelevant. She had lived a life where recognition meant survival, not fame. What mattered to her was the lesson her students had absorbed, not about chemistry, but about life itself. Jake, however, couldn't escape the consequences. The school board convened an emergency meeting. The evidence was overwhelming. Testimonies from classmates, statements from Ms. Carter, and even the video clips that had circulated online. Jake was officially expelled. His record now carried a permanent mark that would follow him into applications, interviews, and beyond. The blow to his ego was devastating. Universities began rescinding their interest. Sports recruiters who once eyed him as a potential athlete turned away, unwilling to take on the liability of his violent behavior. Even military academies, which his father suggested as a backup, refused his application after reviewing the incident. For Jake, the future he once believed was wide open suddenly narrowed to a suffocating tunnel of closed doors. And for Ms. Carter, her reputation soared. She became a quiet legend in the school, though she never sought the title. Students spoke of her with respect, her lessons carrying weight not just in academics but in character. Weeks later, during an assembly, Principal Harris acknowledged her in front of the entire student body. "We often talk about role models, about strength, about leadership. Today, we have one in our very own halls. Ms. Carter reminded us all that discipline, courage, and respect are the cornerstones of true power. The applause was thunderous. Students stood, clapping not just for their teacher, but for the message she embodied. Jake, watching from afar, could only feel the weight of what he had lost. Not just status, but respect, dignity, and opportunity. His downfall wasn't just about being overpowered in a classroom. It was about being exposed for what he truly was, a boy who mistook cruelty for strength. Ms. Carter, meanwhile, left the assembly with the same quiet grace she always carried. No victory lap, no self-congratulation. She simply walked back to her lab, ready for the next lesson, the next class, the next opportunity to shape young minds. For her, power had never been about domination. It had always been about control, about knowing when to stand firm and when to let go. That was the military's gift to her, and now it was her gift to her students. Jake's future, however, was a cautionary tale whispered in the halls for years to come. "Don't end up like Jake," students would say to one another. "Don't mistake fear for respect." And with every retelling, Ms. Carter's legend grew, not because she sought it, but because she lived it. The classroom slowly settled into silence, the echoes of chaos replaced by a heavy weight of realization. The bully, once so arrogant and untouchable, now sat trembling, his eyes downcast, his power stripped away by the very woman he thought he could intimidate. But for the teacher, this wasn't just about winning a fight. It was about proving a truth she had learned long ago. Respect is earned, not demanded, and strength lies not in cruelty but in control. Her military past was no longer just a secret. It was a reminder that everyone carries unseen battles, experiences, and scars. The students, watching wide-eyed, didn't just see discipline enforced, they saw justice. They saw courage. And they understood, perhaps for the first time, that actions have consequences that ripple far beyond the moment. The bully would face his punishment, both in school and at home. But the real lesson wasn't his alone. Every student in that room walked away changed, their view of the teacher transformed, their understanding of respect deepened. The woman they once underestimated had become more than just an instructor. She was a protector, a guide, and a symbol of resilience. As for the teacher, she didn't bask in victory. Instead, she turned back to her desk with quiet resolve, knowing the hardest battles are not fought with fists, but with patience, strength, and unwavering dignity. In the end, the classroom conflict was more than a dramatic showdown. It was a story of truth revealed, arrogance shattered, and respect restored.